Welcome to Amazing Dinosaurs. Today I'm showing you this entire Jurassic World quadrupedal dinosaur collection and ranging them from biggest on the table all the way to the smallest. And we're going to start with the biggest figures over here. I think the largest one is this Jurassic World Dominion Brachiosaurus figure. This Dominion version has an updated paint design on its back and on its neck and the reflective blue on its head. And since it's the biggest, we're going to place this on the furthest left and go for the next biggest, which I think is this giant Dreadnoughtus figure. Now this figure is seriously ridiculously long. It's probably maybe even 4 feet long from the tip of its head all the way to the tail. And it has a pretty cool blue and orange paint design too. So let's grab this and put this next in line as the next largest dinosaur right here. And we're gonna grab the next giant figure, which is a Jurassic World Apatosaurus figure. Now this figure is still pretty long compared to a lot of these smaller figures, but compared to the Dreadnoughtus figure right next to it, see how much longer its neck is? It is definitely a whole lot smaller. Now that we've got the 3 biggest set up, let's go for the next biggest one, which I think is this Brachiosaurus figure right here. This figure is a whole lot smaller than these giant ones right here, but it's still a pretty good size. It's probably a foot tall. It has some really cool coloring and texturing too. So let's set this next in line as the next largest quadrupedal dinosaur and move on to the next one, which I think is this dinosaur right here. This is an Amargosaurus dinosaur from Jurassic World. It's pretty unique because it has these 2 giant frills going down all the way from its neck to its tail. And it has 2 action buttons. One swings its neck up and down, and the second swings its tail back and forth. We've got a lot of long-necked quadrupedal dinosaurs in here so far. The next in size, I think, might be this one, and this is a brand new one that I bought. This is the Jurassic Park 30th Anniversary Cretaceous figure. And here it is out of the box, and it is quite a sizable figure. This, of course, is from the Hammond collection. I don't know that I have another Cretaceous figure in my collection, so this is pretty neat. It's got some yellow, gray, black, and it's got a real big crown on the top of its head. And of course, it is very adjustable, as many of the Hammond collection figures are. So let's get this next in line. The next quadrupedal dinosaur for this collection is this gray and blue Stegosaurus figure. This is a classic figure made by Mattel for Jurassic World, and it's got a single hidden action button on its back to swing the tail back and forth. And we'll set it down next in line. For the next one, we're gonna go with another Stegosaurus figure. This Jurassic World figure looks pretty identical in shape and size to this gray-blue Stegosaurus, but of course it has totally different coloring, and it has a totally different action button as well. You can press on these 2 spines right here, and it'll swing its entire torso back and forth. That's pretty cool, and I do think I like it better than the action button on this one. Next up, I've got a vintage figure from Jurassic Park. This is the Triceratops figure, numbered JP08. And like many of the figures from the Jurassic Park era, it has the real feel skin, so instead of a hard plastic, like many of the new Jurassic World figures, it has a soft, rubbery skin over almost its entire body. And when you press down on the stomach, it actually has an action where it lifts up its head too. Now let's set it down next in size. I think it's just a little bit shorter than the Stegosaurus figures. For the next quadrupedal dinosaur, we're gonna go with the Diabloceratops figure from the Dino Trackers collection. This cool dinosaur has a fiery red color over its whole body with some tan underneath. And the coolest part are these 4 gigantic horns on the front of its head. And there's an action button for the sound effects and attack button. Now let's set it down next in line, next to the Jurassic Park Triceratops figure. Look at that size difference. Looks like there's some Triceratops figures in this collection, and these are probably one of the most popular quadrupedal dinosaurs. This Triceratops figure comes in the gray coloring with a little bit of dark detailing along the top, and has 2 action buttons, one for the head and one for the tail. And let's put that right next to the Diabloceratops. This next Triceratops figure is actually one that I custom painted myself. It also has a mostly gray color with a bit of gray detailing along the top of its body, but one of my favorite parts are the red coloring along its frill and its bright green eyes too. And overall, I'm really happy with the job that I did on painting this dinosaur. And here's one more Triceratops figure for this quadrupedal collection. This one is a dark green color. It has some brown detailing along the top and an attack feature that when you press down on its back, it lifts up its head. Let's keep on going with these four-legged dinosaurs. This next one is another new figure from the Dino Trackers series. This is the Nigersaurus, and it has mostly green coloring over its whole body and an action button on its back to swing the neck back and forth. I think I actually got to bump this up in line because it's a little bit taller than many of these Triceratops figures. So we're going to put it right here. Next up is another vintage figure. This is the Jurassic Park Amargospinus figure, which I believe is actually a hybrid dinosaur. This figure has some of the brightest coloring that I've seen, and it has a pretty cool feature. When you move the leg on this figure, it actually lifts up the spikes on its back, the spikes on its neck, and it opens its mouth too. And although the head of the Amargospinus is a bit taller than the Triceratops, its body is a little bit shorter, so we're going to put it next in line. Next up is another vintage figure from Jurassic Park. This one, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was called the Chasmosaurus or something like that. It looks quite a bit like a Triceratops. It has the huge frill in the front and some horns on its head too. And like the Amargospinus we saw, if you move the leg on this figure, it lifts its head up for a similar attack action. And check it out, the sound effects still work on this super old figure. Now let's set that up next in line here. For the next figure, I think we'll go with this smaller Parasaurolophus figure. This figure is from Jurassic World Dominion, so it's a newer figure, and it has some bright blue and orange accenting on the top of its body. So let's set that down right here. And now I think it's time to open this huge Jurassic Park 93 Classic Track and Explore vehicle set. Alright, now let's check out this new set. We'll first check out the car. You can open and close the doors. It has this protector for the windshield right here that you can bring down so nothing breaks the glass when you're hunting dinosaurs. It also has a turret coming out of the back of the truck, and I don't think I've seen this color design before. It's got the soft blue coloring with the yellow on the bottom, but it still has the Jurassic Park logo right on the side. And it also comes with this little lasso for hunting dinosaurs, and here is the dinosaur that comes in the set. This is the, I think it's pronounced Scutosaurus or Scutosaurus. It's a bright orange dinosaur. It looks pretty bulky. It has a huge torso. Its two front legs are white, and the two back are orange like the rest of its body. And it looks like it doesn't have any action buttons, but you can adjust the neck and the head, and you can move the legs around too. So let's get all of this next in line. For the next biggest, we're gonna go with this figure from the Dino Trackers series. This is the Gigant Spinosaurus. This figure has some similar orange coloring to the figure that we just saw, and its back is a tan color. But the coolest part are these huge spikes that it's got coming out of its shoulders, and then all the spines running down to its tail. Now let's put that next in line and grab our next dinosaur. Now let's grab this big old Sarcosuchus figure. Now this is another special figure to me because I custom painted this one as well. So originally I think it came in a purple and gray coloring, but I changed it to this camo green with the brown on top and some brighter green along the bottom too. And I think it looks pretty awesome. Next, I'm gonna grab this Ankylosaurus figure right here in the blue and yellow coloring. This is a pretty large Ankylosaurus figure, and I really love the spikes that come off the sides. Plus, there is an action button on its back for swinging its tail. Now I think next I'm gonna grab this other Ankylosaurus figure. This one is actually from the first Jurassic World movie, so this one is made by Hasbro as opposed to Mattel for many of these other figures. But it has an attack that when you move its leg, it swings its tail, and it can move its head back and forth too. Now I'll set that right there, and let's grab our next one, which I think could be this one right here. I believe this dinosaur is called the Styracosaurus. And this one has some pretty cool coloring right on its frill, bright yellow and orange. It's got a ton of spikes all over, and all in all, it's a pretty cool figure. Pretty similar to that one is this Dino Tracker's Zuniceratops figure. It too has a large frill in the front, and it's got some horns, although not anywhere near as many, but it does have an action button on its back to lift up its head for stabbing and attacking. So let's put that next in size. Next up is another new figure. This is the Jurassic World Dominion Pseudoceratops figure. Now let's go ahead and open it up and check it out. Now this, I believe, is the juvenile version. I do have the adult version if you've checked out my other videos. And this little figure has some little horns coming out of its head and dark coloring around its body overall. And we're gonna put that right next to the Zuniceratops. Now let's grab our second to last figure. This is a baby Ankylosaurus figure with very similar coloring as the adult figure right over here. It's got the blue and the yellow underbelly. And this figure specifically is actually Ankylosaurus Bumpy. We're gonna put it right there. And for our final figure, this weird looking dinosaur is the Nothosaurus dinosaur. As you can see, its body stays really close to the ground, although it's technically standing on all four legs. It has this really long neck and a long and narrow snout with a bunch of nasty looking teeth. Now let's put that on the very end of the line as our final and smallest dinosaur. First up, we've got a ginormous Spinosaurus figure. This is the Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus with the brown body and red along its spine and face, and it's got the action button on its head for the chomping and roaring. Next up, we've got the Terran T-Rex. This T-Rex has a really cool ability. When you press down on this button, it does a tearing action. Look at that, it's like tearing away some meat. That's really cool. And it comes with a second action button to swing the tail. Next up, we've got a big old Therizinosaurus figure, just like in the Jurassic World Dominion movie. It's got the red stripe down its back all the way to the top of its head, and this figure has some special features as well. There is a button on its tail to activate the jaw and the neck, and you can use the tail to swivel the torso back and forth. Plus, check out those huge claws. Next dinosaur is the Stomp and Escape T-Rex. This figure has a light brown body with gray detailing. It has one button on the top of its back for the roaring and chomping. And the tail, when you twist it, stomps its feet. Some pretty cool sound effects that come with it too. Next up, we've got a big old Carnotaurus figure. This has a light red or orange coloring along most of its body. It's got the gray underbelly and the brown top, and tons of little bumps along its back, as well as the two horns on the top of its head. And this figure has an action button for the chomping, and you can use the tail to move the head around too. Here's another T-Rex that I bought just recently. This is the new Extreme Battle Damage T-Rex. Check it out, there's a button on its back that you can use to activate the battle damage on the side. That's pretty cool. And the rest of the figure is fully posable as well. Here is another ginormous T-Rex in the back. This one is camo colored, and I believe it's custom colored. That was done a long time ago. And this figure has a few actions that you can do with the tail. You can move the tail up, and it does a roaring pose. And you can move the tail down, and it does a chomping action. This dinosaur is a Baryonyx. It's got the light green coloring and the light brown and dark brown along the top. And it's got an action button on its back for the chomping. Right over here is an Albertosaurus. This figure is medium sized. It's got the dark green coloring along its body and that red maroon color all the way along the top of its head. And this Albertosaurus actually has the battle damage, both on its leg and the battle damage that you can open and close on its side. And you can even bring the rib cage up and down to reveal the stomach inside. Here is another Baryonyx figure. This one is light gray with blue and light green coloring and a little bit of white along the side. And it has the slide lever action to activate the roaring sound effects and the jaw too. Here's another Baryonyx figure. This one has light green coloring along with some darker green along the top and on its legs, and the darker brown along its neck and the top of its head too. This Baryonyx figure also has the slide lever action that you can use for the sound effects and the chomping. This is the Majingasaurus figure. It's a bit smaller. It's got the dark green coloring with the yellow and bright blue detailing along the sides. It has teeny tiny arms that are adjustable, and you can use the tail to move the neck and head around. Let's see what we got next up. This is a Carcharodontosaurus figure. It has the dark blue coloring with the yellow and brown detailing along the top. The arms, legs, and tail are fully adjustable, and there's a button on its back for the chomping. Here is a Cryolophosaurus figure. This one has some really cool crowning along the top of its head in that bright orange color, while the rest of its body is yellow and brown along the top. With this figure, you can use the tail to control the head as well. Here is another Baryonyx figure. This one has some bright orange coloring right along the top of its head though. And of course, it's got the button on its back to activate the jaw. Next up, we've got a dark red Carnotaurus figure. This dinosaur has the light underbelly and some purple detailing along the top of its body. And it is very textured. You can see those bumps and ridges all over everywhere. And of course, it's got the huge horns at the top of its head, plus an action button to activate the chomping. Next up, we've got a super bright yellow Suchomimus figure. This dinosaur has the brown detailing along the top. It's got that spine all the way from its head, all the way down almost to the end of its tail. And this figure has two action buttons. The first is for the jaw and the chomping, and the second action button activates the tail for swinging around. This dinosaur is a Metriacanthosaurus. It's a bit smaller than the other figures. It's got the dark red coloring with some darker detailing along the top, and the bright yellow-orange coloring right along its head. And of course, it's got an action button on its back to activate the jaw. I've got another Suchomimus figure. This one is a dark blue color with some bright yellow detailing along the top and along that spine that goes all the way to its tail. These Suchomimuses have really long and narrow snouts, still full of teeth though, and there is an action button on its back to activate the chomping. Next up is another Carcharodontosaurus figure. This one is tan in color with the brown and orange detailing along the top, and it's got all these little spikes right along its spine, running all the way down to the tail. That's pretty interesting. And this figure has an action button that activates the jaw once again. That's pretty cool. Here we've got an Allosaurus figure with the light tan coloring along the underbelly and the sides, and the darker blue along the top of its back all the way to the top of its head. This figure also has the slide lever action for a bunch of different sound effects and chomping actions. Over here we've got a big Dilophosaurus figure in the bright red coloring along with the green, brown, and red along its frills, and that super bright yellow crown on the top of its head too. This figure is pretty basic though, so it doesn't have any action buttons, but you can still move the arms, the legs, and the tail, as well as move the frills back and forth. Here is a basic Spinosaurus figure. This one is a lot smaller than the Spinosaurus that we saw at the beginning of this video, and this one has the dark green coloring, but still has the iconic red spine and the red around the eyes as well. And on this figure, you can't open and close the jaw, but you can just move the arms, the legs, and the tail. Next up, we've got a huge Carnotaurus figure. This one has some darker red, basically brown coloring along the side. It has a dark gray underbelly and the black along the top. And this figure has a few actions too. The tail actually controls the head, so you can swing that around and up and down, and there's a button on the tail to activate the jaw too. Here is another Cryolophosaurus figure. This one is a dark blue color. It's got the light underbelly and some white detailing on the sides, and then a bunch of red along its back and on the crown on the top of its head too. And just like the other one that we saw, you can use the tail to control the neck. Here is the Baryonyx from the Hammond collection. This Baryonyx is way more adjustable than a lot of figures that you'll see in here. Check that out. You can move its elbows and its arms, all over on its legs. It's pretty realistic with its movement, and it's got a bit more texturing than a lot of the other Baryonyx figures that I have. Looks like we've got some mini Dilophosaurus figures in here. This first one is a soft purple color, and it's got some yellow, orange, and red on its frills. Looking pretty scary. And I've also got this soft green Dilophosaurus that's also got some orange and some yellow on it. And this one actually has an action that when you move the tail, it springs the frills up. That's really cool. Here is the Irritator figure. Most of this figure is dark brown. It's got a little bit of the light underbelly, and it's got some cool dark blue and light blue detailing all along its spine, all the way to the top of its head. And check out that super long mouth with all those teeth. All right, looks like we got another giant Dilophosaurus figure in here. This one is green and has red frills and the red crown. And just like the other one, you can open and close the frills, as well as move the arms, legs, and the tail too. Next up, I believe that this is the Roarivore Allosaurus. This dinosaur is gray all along its body and has the yellow detailing right along the top of its body, all the way to the tip of its head. Here is another Metriacanthosaurus figure. This one is a dark mustard yellow along most of its body and underbelly, and it's got that dark green detailing along the top of its back all the way to its head. And it has an action button on its back for chomping the jaw. We've got another Albertosaurus figure in here. This one does not have the battle damage on its side though. It's got the bright orange detailing on its side all the way up to its eyes, while the rest of its body is a dark green color. This figure has an action where you can move the tail to control the head, as well as press the button on its tail to activate the jaw too. Check it out, another Baryonyx figure. This one has the bright reflective blue coloring on the top of its head, while the rest of its body is a soft brown color and a dark gray blue detailing along the top. And it's got the action button on its back for the jaw. Looks like we've got a few Monolophosaurus figures in here as well. This first one is a brown color with gray detailing, and is pretty adjustable. It's a pretty small figure though. This other Monolophosaurus figure actually has some battle damage on the side that you can open and close, and is fairly adjustable as well. And this final one is a dark green color, has some yellow detailing and that bright red detailing, and check out those green eyes too. And this figure actually has an action button. When you move the tail, it chomps its jaw open and closed. Last of all, we've got a Gallimimus figure. This dinosaur is a soft brown color and it has some darker brown striping along the top, and you can move its head up and down as well as its other limbs too. Let's get started with the largest quadrupedal that I have, which is this huge Dreadnoughtus figure. This dinosaur has the blue with the tan striping, and it has one of the longest necks out of any of my figures. So let's set this figure on the very left because this is my largest dinosaur. Next up in size is one of these Brachiosaurus figures. Let's first choose this one right here. It's got the classic brown coloring, and you can move its legs, its neck, and you can even open and close its mouth. Let's move this Brachiosaurus right next to the Dreadnoughtus. Check out that size difference between these two. Next up, we've got another Brachiosaurus figure, but this one is newer. This one is part of the Jurassic World Dominion collection. Now, its body shape is pretty much the same as this one right here, but you'll notice that it has some different coloring, and the best part of all is that it has this reflective blue coloring along its face. Next up in size, we've got this huge Apatosaurus figure. This dinosaur is quite a bit smaller than the Brachiosaurus figures, but it's still quite large. It has the green with the light green striping, and I'm sure you recognize this dinosaur from the Jurassic World Dominion movie. Let's keep going. I think the next biggest in size is this Amargosaurus figure. I think this figure's pretty old and that they don't make it anymore, but it's really cool because it has these two huge spines running down its neck and two action buttons, one to move the neck up and down and one to swing the tail back and forth. All right, let's set this down right next to the Apatosaurus. Wow, look at that size difference. Next up in size, let's go with the Jurassic World Dominion Ankylosaurus figure. This figure features the clay red and brown coloring. It's got tons of spikes all over its body, and it has the tail that controls the head and the chomping action too. Let's set the Ankylosaurus down next in line. Oh, those are pretty close in size. Next up, let's go with the Pentaceratops figure. This dinosaur has one of the largest frills that I've seen out of any dinosaur. Plus, it's got horns all along its frill and on its face too. And it has two action buttons, one to move the head up and down, and one to move the torso side to side. All right, let's set this down next to the Ankylosaurus. Next up in size, I think we gotta go with the Stegosaurus figures here. This first one has brown, it's got green, it's got the clay red coloring, and like all the other Stegosaurus figures, it has a tail swinging attack button. Let's set down this first Stegosaurus next to the Pentaceratops. And I think all these Stegosauruses are going to be pretty similar in size, so let's just go with this one next. It's got the blue-gray coloring with the darker coloring along the top, and the pink underbelly, and of course the swinging tail attack. Let's get this Stegosaurus down next in line. This next one is brighter in color. It's almost a teal-green color. It's still got a lighter underbelly, and it has some cool highlights right along its spine. This one will be our third Stegosaurus in line. And our fourth and final Stegosaurus of this collection is this gigantic Trackers Stegosaurus. And this is actually a very new figure. It's got some really cool coloring all over its body, plus it comes with this crazy looking Dino Tracker backpack. Let's set it down as our fourth Stegosaurus. Next in size, I think, is this Diabloceratops figure. Check out these super huge horns on the top of its head and on the front of its face too. It's got a fiery red color over most of its body and the light tan underbelly, plus there's an action button to swing its head back and forth. Let's put this down next in size. Up next, let's go with this Spinosaurus in the light gray blue with the tan detailing. And check out those super dark black eyes. That's pretty crazy looking. Let's put this one down next in line, and you can use the tail to move the head too. I've got another Spinosaurus figure right here that is probably the exact same in size, but it's got different coloring. This one is the green with the tan detailing, and this one has some bright yellow eyes. So let's set this one down too, and look at that. This one also controls the head by moving the tail. It looks like we've got a few Triceratops figures up next. This first one has the dark brown with the two tones of blue along its back, and just like these Spinosaurus figures, you can use the tail to control the head. Let's go ahead and grab this next Triceratops figure with the gray and darker gray detailing along the top. But with this figure, instead of the tail that controls the head, there are two action buttons on its back. One controls the head for roaring, and the other controls its tail for swinging back and forth. Now let's set this down next in line as the second Triceratops. And this next Triceratops has some green coloring with brown along its frill and along its back too. And this Triceratops has an even different action. When you press down on its body, it does a roar, and it has sound effects too. Oh, you know what? I think there's another Triceratops here that I didn't even notice. This one has the clay red coloring with the brown detailing along the top and on the frill. And this one has one single action button on its back for the roaring action. This next quadrupedal dinosaur is a Kentrosaurus. It's got the spines running all along its back and these ginormous spikes coming right out of its sides. And this one has a pretty cool action that when you slide this back, it swings its torso back and forth to stab with those huge spikes. Now this dinosaur might be a little taller with its spines compared to the Triceratops, but we're gonna place it right here anyways. For the next up in size, we're gonna go with this dinosaur. This is the Edmontosaurus. Its front legs are smaller compared to its back legs. It's got some pretty cool coloring on its face and on that crown on the top of its head. And like many of these other cool figures that we've seen, you can use the tail to control the head. And it has sound effects too. Next, we're gonna go with this Iguanodon figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's mostly tan, it's got some brown striping with the lighter streaks on the top. And with this figure, when you press down on its back, it has a chomping action. All right, next, let's go with this crazy looking dinosaur. This is a Sarcosuchus. It's got a long and narrow snout with tons of teeth. And the coolest part is that you can use the tail to control the head. The next dinosaur that we're gonna choose is this Ankylosaurus figure right here. This one is clay red, it's got some brown, and its spikes are a lighter color. And I think this one was from Jurassic World Dominion because when you press down on its back, it swings its tail back and forth. Let's go ahead and grab this next Ankylosaurus for our next in size. This one is a really old figure from Jurassic World. I think this one is from the first movie. And check out the size difference between the two. Next up, we've got two baby Brachiosaurus figures right here. And they each have their own unique color. This first one's gray, it's got some dark brown purple coloring along the top. And this other one is a much brighter color. It's a bright green with dark green right along the top. So let's set these down right next to the Ankylosauruses. Next in size, let's see, I think it might be this dinosaur, which I believe is called a Styracosaurus. It's got some super bright coloring along the front of its frill, which is really interesting, and it has some darker detailing along its back. Now let's set this down right next to the baby Brachiosauruses. I think next we're gonna go with this Miragaia figure from Jurassic World Dominion. Like the Kentrosaurus, this one also has some huge spikes sticking right out of its sides. Now let's set it down right next to the Styracosaurus. Next, why don't we go with this dinosaur? This is the Chialingosaurus. It looks somewhat similar to a Stegosaurus because it's got those spines in the top, but the spikes in the very back are quite a bit different, and it has these tiny little spikes coming out of its front legs. And let's set this one down next in line. Next, let's go with this crazy looking dinosaur. This is the Shringosaurus, and it's got a huge and very long neck. It's got those two evil looking horns on the top of its head too. Very wild looking. Let's put this next in line. For the next in size, why don't we go with this one? This is a Calavosaurus. It's got a dark blue body with some orange detailing. It's got some light blue stripes along its tail and on its mouth as well. And it looks like we're running out of space at the edge of the table, so we're gonna start a new line right in front. For our next in size, let's go with this baby Triceratops figure with extreme battle damage right on the side. And let's put this one down right next to the Calavosaurus. This next dinosaur, I believe, is called a Zuniceratops. It's got a pretty bright body, and it's got two horns on the front of its head. So let's set this down right next to the baby Triceratops. They look pretty similar. For our next one, why don't we go with this baby Stegosaurus figure? And you may notice that this baby Stegosaurus came as part of a set with this huge Stegosaurus right here. You can see that they're very similar in color. So let's set this down next in size, next to the Zuniceratops. And next we'll go with these two Dimetrodon figures. This first one is the older figure of the two, and this figure has an action that when you move its tail, it chomps its jaw open and closed. So we're gonna put that right there. And this other Dimetrodon figure is from Jurassic World Dominion, so it's pretty new. And it's got a much brighter spine, although it does not have any action buttons. So we're gonna set it down right next to the other one. Next up, it looks like we've got a Sauropelta figure. This is a pretty small figure, but it has some huge spikes on its back in comparison. It's really cool. So let's set this one down next in line. Here we have a small dinosaur. This is a Mosasaurus. It's got blue with some black detailing along the top and the yellow underbelly. And we'll set this down right here. And finally, we have two Minmi figures. This first one right over here is mostly green in color. Its spikes are more of a yellow color, but it has a ton of spikes along its back for protection. And this second Minmi figure right here is red in color, and its spikes are a bright white in contrast. But other than that, it is pretty identical to the other minifigure. Check out the first theropod. This is the 93 real feel T-Rex figure that came out really recently. It's got the rubbery skin and the stomach compartment so you can actually feed this T-Rex smaller dinosaurs. Our first sauropod, I believe, is a Brachiosaurus figure. This figure comes in the dark green. It has some red detailing along the top and the lighter underbelly, and of course the super long neck with the smaller head in the front. Our next theropod is the Camp Cretaceous Epic Roarin' T-Rex. It comes in the light brown coloring with the darker brown along the top and the tail that controls the head and the chomping. Our next sauropod, I believe, is another Brachiosaurus. This one has much more interesting detailing along its body. You can see all the different muscles and the bones as well. And it comes in this darker green coloring. There's also some darker detailing throughout. And at the top of its head, it's got some dark orange eyes. Our next theropod is this special Spinosaurus figure. This figure is from Jurassic World, but it actually has custom coloring over its entire body, so you won't see this coloring anywhere else. Plus, it's got the button on its head for the chomping action too. For the next sauropod is the Nigersaurus figure from Jurassic World. This one is part of the new Dino Tracker series. It has two tones of green, the bright green in the front and the darker green in the back, and a slide lever action on its back for the sound effects and movement. This next theropod is another T-Rex. This one's pretty special because it comes in a dark green coloring with the black accenting on top, which is pretty unusual for the Jurassic World figures. And its entire body is posable, and of course you can chomp the jaw with the button at the top of its head. Next up is a strange looking sauropod. I'm actually not sure what type of sauropod this is, so let me know in the comments if you recognize the species. But it has some amazing coloring with the green, purple, blue, red, and these interesting spikes along its neck. Now let's check out this one that I just bought, and let's see what it is. All right, this is a theropod, and it is the battle damage Spinosaurus. This one was actually really hard to find, so let's open it up and check it out. I am super excited to finally have this to add to my collection. This is the first blue and yellow Spinosaurus figure that I have. In terms of its shape and its size, it's pretty similar to the Legacy collection and the Camp Cretaceous version. But for the best part, let's check out the battle damage right here on the side. That is so cool. That is ginormous. And then you can also even open up its ribs to reveal what's underneath right here. And there's a hidden button right here on its spine that make its insides spin. Now that is pretty awesome. Let's do another theropod. This is a custom colored T-Rex figure. This one's pretty special because it looks like a fire T-Rex. And I think it definitely looks scarier than most of the other T-Rex figures. This next sauropod figure is an Ankylosaurus, and this one was for Jurassic World Dominion. It's got a bunch of interesting little spikes all over its body, and you can use the tail to move the head around and open and close its mouth. This theropod is called the Suchomimus figure. This version is in the dark blue with the yellow accenting and one action button on its back to chomp the jaw. This other theropod figure is the Therizinosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's a pretty big figure, and it has feathered texturing all over its body, and the best part are these huge claws on its hands. This next figure here might be a Diplodocus figure, I'm actually not sure, but it has some cool coloring, the brown stripes on the back, the gray on the sides, tan underbelly, and it has some pretty decent detailing too. They even colored in the eyes. This theropod figure is the Jurassic World Carcharodontosaurus. This version of this dinosaur has the tan body with the brown and orange accenting along the top, and all these little spikes running along its back, and a single action button for chomping. Now here's a pretty special one. This is the Lego edition Brachiosaurus figure. I think these figures are pretty rare and hard to find nowadays, so I'm pretty happy to have one in my collection. This theropod is the Seats Microrarum figure from Jurassic World. It's colored in the orange, the tan, and the dark blue. It's got a ton of rows of spikes running along its head and its back. And it has the action that when you move its tail, it also moves its head and controls its jaw. This sauropod is called the Amargosaurus. It has the dark brown coloring with the darker accenting and a little bit of red along its spines. And check out, there's actually 2 rows of spines along its neck that form into one spine running down its body. And this figure has 2 action buttons. The first button moves its head up and down, and the second action swings its tail back and forth. This theropod is the Allosaurus figure. This version is in the dark green and it has the white and red accenting. It's got a short row of spines right on the top of its neck. And this figure has the slide lever action for a bunch of sound effects and roar poses. This next sauropod kind of looks like a Brachiosaurus figure to me, and I think this is the only one that I have that is red colored. And sadly, you can't move any of its limbs or its tail or anything like that, but I do appreciate the detail and texturing along its body. This theropod is another Allosaurus figure, but this one is in the gray with the yellow accenting. It also has posable arms and legs and a single action button on its back for chomping. Here's the second Suchomimus figure of this sauropod versus theropod collection. This second version has the bright yellow body with the brown accenting along the top, and this Suchomimus features 2 action buttons, one for chomping and the other for swinging its tail. Man, do I have a lot of Brachiosaurus figures. This one is also a Brachiosaurus. It's got some interesting orange spotting all over its body and is quite a bit smaller than many of the other figures so far. This next theropod is another T-Rex figure. This one is from the first Jurassic World movie, and it's actually a pretty special one. It's got some interesting coloring, patterning along its side, and it actually has hidden spikes that pop out when you press a button. Over here, I've got an Irritator figure from Jurassic World. This is an older version that features the brown sides with the 2 tones of blue along its spine. And this feature comes with sound effects and a tail that controls the head. I've also got some Baryonyx figures in here, like this dark green one with the brown coloring along the top and the single action button on its back for chomping. This next figure is a basic Velociraptor figure from Jurassic World. This one is actually Velociraptor Blue. And since it's a basic figure, you can only move the arms and the legs and the tail, but there's no action button. Up next is my first baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one is in the gray with purple coloring along the top. And even though it's so small, you can still open and close the mouth. This giant figure in here is my Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus figure. Compared to the battle damaged version that we saw earlier, this one has the tan body with the brown along the top, and then the red spine and the red face. This next theropod is a Monolophosaurus figure, and is a pretty small figure, but it has the dark blue coloring with the I think that's kind of a brown accenting along the top of its body. And with this figure too, you can open and close its mouth as well as move its arms and its legs and twist the tail too. Here's my next baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one is a bit more recent and it comes in the brown coloring with a little bit of tan accenting along the side. The next theropod is actually a Pyroraptor, which is very similar to a raptor, but you can see that it has feather texturing all over its body here, and it has these really cool accent feathers right behind its head too. And here is my third juvenile Brachiosaurus figure. This one is the light green version with the dark green along the top, and of course the fully posable arms, tail, neck, and mouth. And here's the final theropod. This is an Atrociraptor figure. This version is the bright orange with the tan accenting along its body. Finally, we have these two huge sauropod figures. This first one on the right is a giant Brachiosaurus figure. It's much larger than this one over here. And this Brachiosaurus is actually an older version. There is a Jurassic World Dominion figure that's come out more recently. And this figure here is the Apatosaurus figure from Jurassic Jurassic World Dominion. It's smaller compared to the Brachiosaurus, but still a giant compared to many of the other figures. The first unusual species is this Eocarcharia figure from the new Dino Trackers series. It's got a fantastic feathering texture over its whole body and a single lever action on its back for the chomping and roaring. Next up is the mighty Yangchuanosaurus figure. This has the green and brown coloring, and you can use the tail to control the head and open and close the jaw. Here is the Irritator dinosaur, and I think it's from the Dino Trackers series. This figure has some really cool coloring, and that same action button on its back for the chomping and roaring. Next up is this huge Quetzalcoatlus figure. If you're a big fan of the movies, you might remember this species in the Jurassic World Dominion movie. And it's got one button on its back for flapping its wings, and another button for moving its neck up and down and opening and closing its jaws. Right over here, I've got the Siamosaurus figure. This dinosaur walks on all four legs, and you can use the tail to move the head around and open and close the jaw. Next is a little bit of an older figure. This is a Concavinator figure. It's got this huge hump on its back that's red and purple, and its entire face is purple. And there's an action button on its back for a chomping action, and you can press on its spike to swing its tail back and forth. This aquatic dinosaur is called the Elasmosaurus. It's got a soft blue body, which I bet camouflages really well in the water, and it has two action buttons on its back. One swings its neck side to side, and the other moves its neck up and down. Here is the Proceratosaurus figure. This is the basic edition, so you can move its tail, its legs, and its arm, but sadly there is no action button. Still has some pretty cool coloring though. Next up is the Suchomimus figure. This version is in the yellow and brown, and it has two buttons on its back, one for chomping its jaw, and the other for swinging its tail. And I've actually got the other Suchomimus figure in here. This one is in the blue and yellow coloring. And this figure actually only has one action button, and that is for the chomping action. Check out this crazy looking figure. This is a Diabloceratops from the new Dino Trackers series. It's got the all red body, some gigantic horns on its head. It's got some sound effects, and the lever on its back for the action. Here's a slightly smaller dinosaur, but still pretty scary looking. This is the Majingasaurus dinosaur with the green, yellow, and blue coloring. And while you have to open and close its mouth manually on this figure, you can still use the tail to control the neck and the head. This next figure is from the new Dino Tracker series. This is the Orcaraptor figure. It has some feather texturing on part of its body. It also has these massive claws on its front arms. And just like all the other Dino Tracker figures, has this lever on its back for the roaring and the chomping action. Next up, I've got an Albertosaurus figure in the green and orange coloring. And with this figure, you can move the tail around to twist the neck back and forth and to chomp the jaw. This next uncommon species is a crazy looking carnivore figure. This is a Tarbosaurus. Check out that red underneath its chin and all these huge spikes running down its back. Plus, you can use the tail to twist the neck around and open and close the jaw. This next figure is also quite large. This species is called a Ceops microrarum. It has the orange coloring on the sides and underbelly, and the dark blue on top, with all these rows of spikes on its head and on its back. And of course, its special feature is that you can use the tail to twist the neck around and open and close its jaw. Check out those really cool teeth. Next up is an herbivore figure. This is a Sinoceratops figure, and this version comes in the soft green coloring with some tan detailing and dark orange. And with this Sinoceratops figure, you can use the tail to move its head around in all sorts of directions. Check it out, it's another herbivore figure. This uncommon species is called an Ouranosaurus. It has a huge spine running along the top of its back and some really cool coloring. It's got the green on its body, bright yellow, orange, and even some blue on its face. And it has this action button on its side for moving its head and sound effects. Right over here, I've got the Ankylosaurus figure. Now this one is a bit older of a figure, but it's still pretty uncommon of a species. And it has two action buttons on its back. The first moves its head up and down, and the second button activates its tail for swinging back and forth. Alright, here's another carnivore. This is a Cryolophosaurus figure, and this version is the yellow one with the brown coloring and the huge crown on the top of its head. And with this figure, although you have to open and close its mouth manually, you can still use the tail to move its neck around. This next four-legged dinosaur is called a Nigersaurus. It's got the two tones of green on its body, and since it's from the Dino Tracker series, it has this special feature button on its back used for moving its head in all sorts of directions. This next uncommon species is called a Dryptosaurus figure, also from the new Dino Tracker series. It's got more dark coloring over most of its body, and it's got spikes all over on its head, on its back, and a bunch on its tail as well. And it's got the action button on its back for chomping and sound effects. This next figure is called the Gigant Spinosaurus dinosaur. It looks kind of like a Stegosaurus because it has those frills on its back, but it also has these huge spines coming out of its shoulder too. And it is actually spring-loaded so that when you move the head back and forth, it actually swings the tail back and forth too. Next up, I've got the Piatsnitskisaurus. It's got some pretty cool blue coloring over its whole body, and also some red, some orange, and some light green. Next up is the Nothosaurus dinosaur. It's a pretty weird-looking species. It's got some short legs and a really long neck and narrow snout. Here is the Shringosaurus dinosaur in the yellow and brown coloring. It walks on all four legs, and it has this massive pair of horns on the top of its head. Next up is the Austroraptor dinosaur figure. It comes in the tan and brown coloring and has a bit of dark orange along the top of its head, and it has a really long and narrow snout. Next up is a Herrerasaurus, which you might have heard before, but this is actually a pretty new figure and looks quite a bit different compared to the old version. Plus, it has an action button on its back for a chomping motion. This is the Geniodecticyrus figure. This version comes in the dark brown and yellow coloring, and it also has an action button on its back for opening and closing its jaw. Here is another aquatic dinosaur. This one is called the Tanystropheus figure. It's got some short little legs that you can adjust and a bright blue body, and when you move the tail up and down, it actually swings its neck way down to the bottom. Now here's a crazy looking dinosaur. This uncommon species is called a Scutosaurus. It's got a bright orange body and it walks on all fours, and check out these huge horns underneath its chin. I've got a few more winged dinosaurs in here. This species is called Rhamphorhynchus. It's got some bright yellow-green wings and a bunch of crazy looking teeth in its mouth. This next dinosaur species is called the Zungadaripterus. It's got bright yellow wings and a brown body, and you can actually see feather texturing all over its wings too. Plus, it's got a pretty unique looking face and jaw. Next up is a Dracorex figure. This one is colored bright green with some gray striping, and check out all those horns on the back of its head. Oh, you know what? I've got another winged dinosaur in here. This one is called the Tapehara. It's got a lot of orange and some green on its body, but the coolest part is this face. Check that out. Plus, there's a button on its back to flap its wings. The next dinosaur is an Elaphrosaurus figure. It comes in the blue coloring with some yellow and dark brown detailing. Check out those huge horns on the top of its head. Here is the extreme battle damage Quilmosaurus figure. It has the light green body with the dark green on top and the bright red chin. And check out that battle damage on the side that you can click on and off. Alright, I've got another aquatic dinosaur. This one is called the Plesiosaurus. It's got a dark green body with the white underneath, also to camouflage in the ocean, and a single action button on its back to move its fins. This next uncommon figure is the Masiakasaurus dinosaur. It has the dark red body with the yellow spotting all over, and spotting is pretty unusual for these dinosaur figures, and the single action button on its back for chomping its jaw. This is the Rugops primus figure. It has some feather texturing over its body and the soft green coloring on its body with the black on its tail and on its face. Here is the Miragaia figure. This figure looks quite a bit like a Stegosaurus, but this one also has the huge spikes coming out of its shoulders and a lot more spikes on its tail too. And here is a Pachycephalosaurus figure. I believe this one is from the Legacy collection, and this figure has a special feature that when you press down on its tail, it has the headbutting action. This little dinosaur here is called a Troodon. It has the pink underbelly and gray on the sides and the black spine and the black along the top of its head too. Next up is the Protoceratops figure. There's a few versions of this, and this one is in the bright green with yellow accenting. This figure, I believe, is called the Sauropelta. It has some huge spikes coming out of its shoulders and is actually spring-loaded, so you can swing its shoulders back and forth with those huge spikes. Here's a crazy looking figure. This is actually a hybrid dinosaur from the first Jurassic World movie. This is a Triceratops and Stegosaurus hybrid. Check out that battle damage right on the side too. And it even has an action button. When you press down its tail, you get a stabbing action with its head. And last of all, I've got the Zuniceratops figure. This is a newer version that is in the brown coloring with the tan and black on its face, and it has a single action button for a stabbing action. First two figures to face off in this collection is this Spinosaurus and this battle damaged T-Rex. Let's check out the Spinosaurus first. This is the Legacy Collection Spinosaurus, so this one's actually pretty hard to find nowadays. It's got the huge front arms, it's got a long and narrow snout with a lot of teeth, and this figure is quite a bit larger than its opponent, the battle damaged T-Rex. This figure is a bright orange color. It's got battle damage slashes painted all over its body, even right on its face and on its chin. Now this T-Rex has tiny arms compared to the Spinosaurus, but it's still got the same jaw-chomping action. Next up for the versus is this T-Rex versus this Allosaurus figure. Let's start with the T-Rex. This is the Jurassic World Dominion battle damage T-Rex. It's got a darker orange body than the T-Rex that we just saw, and you can turn the battle damage on and off with the click of a button, and overall it has some pretty cool detailing and darker shading. Now let's see what's different about this huge Allosaurus figure, also from Jurassic World Dominion. Now this figure also has battle damage on the side, but you can even open it up and move the ribs to show the stomach underneath. Now this Allosaurus is a little bit smaller than the T-Rex, but it still has an awesome button for jaw chomping and sound effects. Up next for our Predator competition is this Jurassic Park Utah Raptor versus this new Dino Trackers Endoraptor. Let's first check out this Endoraptor. It is super reflective. It's a dark blue color. I think it might be just around the same size as the Utah Raptor, but it's got some really cool actions. First, you can move its arms for some sound effects and a jaw-chomping action. And it's also got a button on its back for more jaw-chomping action. Now let's see how this super old Utah Raptor holds up. You can see that little Jurassic Park tattoo on its leg right there. Now this figure used to be battery operated, but unfortunately since it's so old, it doesn't work anymore. Like many of the vintage Jurassic Park figures, it has a soft rubbery skin, and it still has a chomping action when you press down on its tail. Next, let's go with a Carnotaurus versus an Albertosaurus. The Albertosaurus is a little bit smaller than the Carnotaurus, and it has much brighter coloring. It's got the orange stripe running down its side and the green body, and the tail twists back and forth to control the head and chomp the jaw. Now let's check out this bigger Carnotaurus figure. This figure is dark brown with a gray underbelly. It's got even smaller arms than a T-Rex does. And you'll notice that the Albertosaurus arms are a little bit bigger. And just like the Albertosaurus, the tail swivels back and forth to move the head and for a jaw-chomping action. For our next versus, let's grab this other Carnotaurus figure versus this Suchomimus. Let's start with the Carnotaurus. This figure is a bit smaller than the darker Carnotaurus that we just saw. The coloring overall is a lot more simplistic. There's not anywhere near as much shading. There's a little bit of white underneath its chin and some dark coloring on its neck and the top of its head. And the actions are a bit more simplistic too. There is one button at the top of its back for some sound effects. Let's compare that to this bright yellow Suchomimus figure. This Jurassic World figure stands a little bit taller than the Carnotaurus figure. It's got a huge spine that runs all the way from the head down to the tail. And just like the Spinosaurus, it has a long and narrow snout with a bunch of teeth on the inside. And this figure has two actions. The first is a jaw chomping action, and the second is a tail swinging action. Our next two predators are this huge Scorpius Rex figure and this even larger T-Rex figure. Let's start with the T-Rex figure. It's got a light brown body with the darker coloring along the top, and you can move all its limbs, and it has the single button on the top of its head for the chomping action. Now the Scorpius Rex has a few more features. First off, I love the detailing on this figure. There's some bumps. You can see this huge ridge running down its back. It's got these tiny little spikes on its elbows. And of course, it's got the poisonous quills on the end of its tail. And it still has two action buttons. The first moves its jaw, and check out those super awesome teeth. And the second button moves its arms for slashing. Our next two predators are first a Carcharodontosaurus versus a Cryolophosaurus. The Carcharodontosaurus is definitely a little bit bigger, but the Cryolophosaurus is a brighter yellow than the Carcharodontosaurus. Comparing the size, the Carcharodontosaurus is a little bit bigger, and the Cryolophosaurus is a brighter yellow color. It's got movable limbs, and you can use the tail to swing the head around. And the Carcharodontosaurus, though it's not as bright, it still has some bright orange running down its back and on its neck. And instead of the tail as the action button on this figure, there's a button on its back for a chomping action. Right here, we've got a Metriacanthosaurus versus an Allosaurus figure from Jurassic Park. Let's check out this vintage figure first. Now this Allosaurus looks quite a bit different from the new Jurassic World figures. It's got a different head shape and a slightly different body. But the cool thing about this figure is that there's multiple battle damage parts that you can take off of its body. Check that out, and even on its tail too. Look at all that battle damage. That is super cool. Now let's compare that with the Metriacanthosaurus. I believe this is from the Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom era. It's pretty bright in color, and it's around the same size as the Allosaurus figure. And this one doesn't have any battle damage, but it does have an action button on its back to control the jaw. Before we continue on with the rest of the bin, let's actually open up this new Hammond Collection Concavinator. Alright, now I think I only have one other Concavinator figure in my entire collection, so I'm super happy to add this one. It looks like it has quite a few different colors on its body. It's mainly got this blue, and there's some bright orange, brown, light tan, and then a very dark red right around its eyes. And since it's a Hammond Collection figure, it doesn't have any action buttons, but its body is super posable. You can bend it at all of its limbs and joints. And its neck and head is especially posable, which I really like. All in all, I think this figure stands up to the quality of all of the other Hammond Collection figures. Next up for our Predator versus Predator, we've got another Carnotaurus versus an Allosaurus. The Carnotaurus figure is quite a bit larger than the Allosaurus, so let's check this one out first. Now this figure has a bright orange body with the gray underbelly. It's got the tiny little front arms, just like the figure we saw earlier, and it also has the tail that you can move back and forth to move the head and chomp the jaw. Now let's see what's different about this Allosaurus figure. I think this one is even brighter in color. It's got the yellow and two tones of blue. It's got bigger front arms than the Carnotaurus figure. It's also got a tiny little row of spines running down its back to its tail. And this figure has two action buttons. The first operates the jaw, and the second moves the arms up and down. The next two predators are this Dilophosaurus versus the Scorpiovenator. These figures are around the same size, but you'll see that the Dilophosaurus is a little bit longer. Now this Dilophosaurus is the basic edition, so there is no action button. You can move the limbs a little bit, and you can activate the frills, but sadly, that's pretty much it. Let's see how that compares against the Scorpiovenator. This figure is pretty brightly colored as well, and you can move all of the limbs, but this figure does have an action button. When you press down on its back, it activates the chomping action. Check out those sound effects too. Next, we've got the Siatsmicararum versus the Irritator. Between these two, the Siatsmicararum is definitely the larger dinosaur. It's got tons of spikes on its head, running all the way down to its back. And like many of the other figures we've seen so far, you can move the tail back and forth to move its head and chomp its jaw. Now let's check out its competitor, this Irritator. Although it's a little bit smaller, it still has some really cool coloring with the 2 tones of blue on the top. And on this figure, you can use the tail to move the head around as well, although you have to open and close the mouth manually. Let's keep on going. For our next versus, we've got a Ceratosaurus versus an Indoraptor, and see how much longer the Indoraptor is compared to the Ceratosaurus. This Indoraptor is the basic edition, so once again, there are no action buttons that you can press, but you can still move its arms, legs, and its tail, and it's still got some awesome spikes on its body. Let's see how the Ceratosaurus is different. It's got a dark green body with some black detailing on the top. This dinosaur seems a lot more bulkier in size. And of course, it's got an action at the top of its back for roaring and sound effects. This is the Baryonyx versus the Amber Collection Raptor. I think the Baryonyx is a little bit bigger, but this Raptor is so much more brighter. Because this figure is from the Amber Collection, there's a lot more attention to the coloring, and the limbs can be posed in many more different ways too. This figure is perfect for posing on a display shelf. Now let's check out its competitor, the Baryonyx. Because this figure isn't from the Amber Collection, there's not as much that you can pose on its body, but the cool part about this figure is that it has an action button on its back. Check out that chomping action. Now let's compare 2 very different dinosaurs. This is a Pteranodon versus an Allosaurus. This Pteranodon figure has foldable wings that you can open up, and it's probably a foot in length from wingtip to wingtip, and it's got a button on its back to flap the wings too. Plus, you can open and close its mouth manually. Now let's see this Allosaurus figure. This one is pretty simplistic in color. It has the gray on the sides and then the yellow detailing all along the top. Of course, it's got the iconic ridge right above its eye. And on this figure, there's one single action button for the jaw. These next 2 figures are smaller. I believe this one is called an Elaphrosaurus versus, if I remember correctly, the Rugops Primus figure. The Elaphrosaurus has a long and narrow snout and is mostly tan. It's got some brown as well. But this other figure, it's got darker coloring as well, and you can move its tiny little arms and open and close its mouth. Up next, we've got 2 different raptor species. This first one is a Pyroraptor from Jurassic World Dominion, and this other one is, I believe, an Amber Collection Velociraptor. Just like many of the other Amber Collection figures, it is a lot more posable than many of the normal figures, and they did a pretty decent job with its coloring as well. And the Pyroraptor has some decent detailing. You can check out all those feather designs right there. And the coolest part, I think, about the Pyroraptor are these huge feathers right at the top of its head. And next, we've got a Jurassic World miniature T-Rex figure versus a Jurassic Park Velociraptor. Both these figures are pretty old, but this Velociraptor is the oldest. It's got a spring-loaded chomping action, and it features some pretty unique coloring that I don't think I have another Velociraptor that's colored like this. Now let's check out this other miniature T-Rex figure. This specific figure comes from an older line from Jurassic World. I think it was actually made by Hasbro, so it's got some battle damage right there on the side. And on this figure, you can move the tail back and forth and side to side to operate the jaw and the head. This is the Isla Sorna capture pack. Let's go ahead and open it up. All right, here is our Jurassic World Jeep and the Parasaurolophus. With this Jeep, there's actually a button you can press that shoots out the seat, and then you can see that there's a missile that it shoots too, just like this. That's super cool. This is a super awesome dino hunting playset. Really cool. All right, up next, we've got a Jurassic World Legacy Collection Velociraptor. Let's get this out of the box. All right, so here is the brand new Velociraptor. I don't think I actually have a Velociraptor with this type of coloring. Plus, this Velociraptor has a slashing action with its torso. Look at that spinning motion. That is so cool. It's spring-loaded, so it bounces back and forth. That is really awesome. All right, up next, we've got the Pachycephalosaurus. I love the coloring on this one. It's got that dark blue with the gray. Let's get this out of the box. This is a super cool herbivore. You definitely don't want to get headbutted by this dinosaur. Check out this action move. Spring-loaded head. That is so awesome. And right back here, we've got the Cosmoceratops. That is so interesting. Look at all the horns all over this one's body. Let's get it out of the box. Wow, I love the way this dinosaur looks. It looks like it's wearing a crown almost. Look at the horns on the side too. And this dinosaur has an action as well. Check that out. When you wiggle the tail, the head goes up and down. How cool is that? All right, I know you've been looking at this one. This is a giant velociraptor. Look how big this figure is. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 3 feet from tail to head. And it's actually pretty heavy too. This dinosaur has a stomach compartment right here. So you can actually feed this dinosaur littler dinosaurs or whatever you want, and it'll go down the throat all the way into the stomach where you can open it up and get those toys out again. That is so awesome. And look at the size of these claws too. Right in the back here, we've got the great Tyrannosaurus Rex. Look at the size of this dinosaur. Look at the size of its body. That is a huge neck and face. And of course, there's the action button for roaring. That is so cool. There's so many teeth in its mouth. And of course, you can wiggle the tail and it'll move its head back and forth. Up next, with a super long neck, we've got the awesome Brachiosaurus. Look at that interesting bump on its head right there. That is so cool. This figure doesn't have any movable parts, but it is super realistic with its coloring and its texture. That is so cool. And one of the next huge dinosaurs in this haul, the great Indominus Rex with battle damage. Look at all those teeth and the awesome battle damage on the side that you can turn on and turn off. There we go. Right up here, we've got a Stegosaurus with a gray-blue coloring. Look at that tail swiping action. That is so cool. And you can adjust the head too. Here's one of my favorite dinosaurs, the Carnotaurus. That is super awesome. It's got a little battle damage on its head. And with the tail, you can move the head. Here's what I think is one of the scariest predators in Jurassic World. This is the Scorpius Rex. It's got loads of teeth in its mouth, super sharp claws, and look at this poisonous tail. Those quills on its tail are poisonous, so you better watch out for those. Here is a super bright dinosaur. This is a predator. It is the Suchomimus. Look at that long mouth with all those teeth. Kind of like an alligator, really. And look at that fin all along its back right there. Right over here is an herbivore. This is the Ankylosaurus. And look at all that armor plating. Here is a scary looking predator. Look at that red all along its neck. This is the Carcharodontosaurus. This is a super cool looking dinosaur. See all those spikes along its back? That is super awesome. Right over here, this predator looks kind of like an alligator too. This is the Sarcophagus with all those teeth in its mouth and this red scaling all along its back and then the green bottom. All right, we've got a bunch more predators and herbivores in here. These two are both Carcharodontosauruses, and look at the difference in coloring too. I think this one's my favorite because I love this orange right along the top of its body. But these are both super cool dinosaurs. Right over here, we've got another herbivore. And look at the horns on this. It kind of reminds me of the horns of a bull, kind of. This is a Ceratops, and it's got an action button in the back. It can whip its tail back and forth. That is super awesome. And it's got a button on the top for swinging its horns around too. Watch out for those horns. All right, let's keep digging. Ooh, this is an interesting looking herbivore. This is a Calavosaurus. I love the coloring on this. Got the yellow on the top and the dark blue on the sides. And you can move the head up and down and the tail and all the legs too. Uh-oh, better watch out. Here's another predator. It's the Baryonyx. This is super cool. Check out that chomping action. Here is another herbivore. This is a very uniquely colored dinosaur. This is a Ceratops, and it kind of reminds me of a Triceratops, you know? See those two horns in the front right there? That is super cool. I've got some smaller herbivores in here. Let's check these out. Wow, these are all so different from each other. This is a Chialingosaurus. Look at those spikes on its shoulder too. How interesting is that? This little one right here is a Protoceratops. Looks very small, and it might be a young Protoceratops, but it is super cool. This orange dinosaur is a Gallimimus. Look at that long neck and the long tail. I bet these dinosaurs ran really fast. And this little dinosaur is a Triceratops. See, got the 3 horns on its head right there. But wait, we've got some more predators in here. Look out, it's the Endoraptor, one of the sneakiest and smartest dinosaurs out there. Let's check out these. This is a baby Brachiosaurus. You can open and close its mouth and move its neck up and down. And this is another giant Stegosaurus. It's got that tail swinging action. Those spikes are super big. Wow, that is so neat. Here comes another predator. This is the Spinosaurus. Look at that huge spine along its back, and then all those teeth right up front. All right, we've got a few more dinosaurs in here. This huge dinosaur figure is a Pentaceratops. And check out these action buttons. Those are some massive horns on its head. Right back here, we've got another Parasaurolophus. And this is an older one. This is actually from Jurassic Park. And it's got a running action too. How cool is that? Super cool. We've got just a few dinosaurs left. This dinosaur is called a Sinoceratops. And look at the size of that one horn on its head in the very front. That is humongous. Let's get started with our first T-Rex. This is the classic Camp Cretaceous T-Rex, and is one of my favorites because of how realistic it looks when you move it. Next, let's grab our first raptor. Let's go with this huge Dino Trackers Endoraptor. This is actually one of the newest and most recent Endoraptor figures that Mattel has released. And there are the first 2 facing off. Let's get some more. Next up, let's go with the classic Jurassic World Dominion T-Rex figure. This figure is a whole lot darker than the Camp Cretaceous version, and it might actually be a little bit bigger. For our next raptor, why don't we go with this big one right here? I believe that this is Velociraptor Blue, and it actually has some pretty cool action features. You can press down on its body for a chomping action, and you can swivel it side to side as if it's walking. All right, let's set that up right in front of the huge Endoraptor. For our next T-Rex, let's go with the huge Stomp and Escape T-Rex. I think this might actually be from Camp Cretaceous as well. And it's got some pretty cool attack buttons. There's a button on its back for the roaring action. Plus, you can twist the tail for stomp sound effects. Let's see, we've got another big raptor in here. Let's go with this next Endoraptor. This is actually a pretty old figure. This is the Grab and Growl Endoraptor. And it's called that because it has a few features. First, you can use this button to move its arms. There's also a button on the bottom of its tail to chomp the jaw. And you can even use the tail to move the head around too. All right, let's put this one pretty close to the other Endoraptor figure. There, he'll be holding on to this little guy. Back to the T-Rexes. Let's grab this guy and see, it is a battle damage T-Rex. Check that out right there on the side with a click of a button. You can reveal the battle damage. Plus, the rest of the body is posable as well. Now let's set this one down right next to the Camp Cretaceous T-Rex. There they are, facing off with the raptors. For our next raptor, we're gonna grab this one at the bottom. This is a Utah raptor from Jurassic Park. So this figure is pretty old and actually has a rubber skin texture as opposed to the hard plastic of all the rest of these. And you can even move the claws on its feet up and down. Let's set this one up right next to the Grab and Growl Endoraptor. On to our next T-Rex, we've got a few more huge ones in here. This one, I believe, is from Fallen Kingdom. And this one features a pretty cool chomping action when you move its tail. Check that out just by moving its tail down. And when you move its tail the other way, it actually has a roaring action. Let's see now, let's put this T-Rex right next to the Stomp and Escape. Back to the raptors, let's grab this little one. This is our first Atrociraptor of this collection. And this is actually a Rowdy Roars Atrociraptor. It is actually battery operated and you can get it to walk around. Plus it has some chomping and roaring sound effects. We're gonna set this one up towards the front because it is a bit shorter than the rest of them. Our next T-Rex is a battle damage T-Rex. You can see that it has some battle damage slashes on its chin and on its neck and on other parts of its body too. So it is a battle damage T-Rex like this one, but this one you can turn on and off, and this one is just painted on its body. And so we're gonna put it right next to the other battle damage T-Rex. Looks like we've got a few more Endoraptor figures in this collection. This one is from Fallen Kingdom, so it's pretty old, and it doesn't have any action buttons, but its whole body is very posable. So let's get them posed, and let's set them right next to the Utah Raptor. For our next T-Rex, we've got a pretty wildly colored one. This one was actually custom colored. Plus, I believe this T-Rex is from the first Jurassic World movie, so you might have some trouble finding it now. Next, let's grab this Atrociraptor figure in the classic white with brown striping, just like in the movie. And this is a basic figure, so sadly there's no action buttons, but it still looks really cool. Let's set it down right next to the other Atrociraptor. Looks like we got one more big T-Rex here. This T-Rex is also from the first Jurassic World movie, so it is pretty old and probably pretty hard to find. And this version has the tan coloring. It's got some gray detailing along its face and the action button on its back for the jaws. All right, here is our final Endoraptor of the collection, I think. This is the basic version of the Endoraptor, so it's a whole lot less posable than many of these other figures right here. And it might actually be a little bit smaller. All right, it looks like it is in the sneaking pose. Check out that gold stripe that switches to a darker brown gold right along its tail. And let's set this up right beside these Atrociraptor figures. Now let's grab this T-Rex figure. This is actually a model T-Rex figure, not made by Mattel, but it still looks really ferocious, has some really cool texturing and color detailing too. And since it's a little bit smaller, let's set it up on the front lines right in front of the raptors. Over here, we've got a huge Velociraptor blue figure. And just like this Endoraptor figure that we see right here, this is the basic version of Velociraptor blue. So it's not super posable, but it still looks great. Let's set this up right behind the basic Endoraptor. We've got some crazy looking T-Rexes in here. This figure's a bit smaller than all the rest of the T-Rexes, but it still has some amazing coloring. Check out that texturing and the fading from the yellow to the green. Let's set this one down right behind the first model T-Rex figure. Back back to our raptors, we've got another Velociraptor blue figure. But this one is from the Amber collection, so this one is super posable. And it's even got some glowing gold eyes. That's a really cool feature. So why don't we set this one up right next to the basic Velociraptor blue figure. Look at the differences in the coloring and the texturing compared to the basic version right here. On to our next T-Rex figure. We've got a blue and gold T-Rex figure right here, and it's even got some bright teal coloring right around its eyes too. I think this figure might be the smallest T-Rex yet, so let's set this one up right in front. Let's go ahead and grab these other two Amber collection Velociraptors. There's first Velociraptor Charlie in the bright green coloring with the striping along the top and a headpiece right behind its face. Let's set this raptor down right in front of the Amber collection Velociraptor blue. And then there's Velociraptor Echo in the brown and black coloring with the lighter underbelly. And so let's set this Velociraptor up right in front of the others. Looks like we've got a few small T-Rexes in here. This is an older figure from the first Jurassic World movie. It's got a little battle damage on the side and a tail that controls the mouth. Now this is a little itty bitty T-Rex, so we're gonna put it right up front. And here is our last raptor of this collection. It looks like it's an Triceratops in the white with brown striping, just like this basic version right here. And so we're gonna set it up right in front, really close to the other T-Rex. And here is our final dinosaur. This is a green T-Rex from the first Jurassic World movie. Just like the other miniature T-Rex that we see right here, it's got the battle damage on the side, and you can use the tail to open and close the mouth, as well as move the neck. So let's set this down right in front, next to the other T-Rex. But wait, I've actually got a surprise for you. I've actually bought some new stuff to show in this collection. This first one is a custom colored T-Rex that I just ordered off of eBay. This is my first time seeing it, and I love the attention to detail with the coloring. It really looks lifelike. Plus, it looks like there's a whole lot more battle damage than there normally was on this figure. That is really cool. And look at that, there's even some more battle damage on the other side. All right, that is super cool. I definitely want to be getting more custom painted T-Rexes. And let's not forget, for the raptor side, I just bought an uncaged Rowdy Roars Velociraptor beta figure. Now let's power it up and check it out. Just like the Rowdy Roar figure back there, there's a button at the top of the head. You get some chomping and sound effects. And you can also touch it underneath its chin to make it walk.
Want to see more dino videos? Click the subscribe button now.